Ethan. How is your friend Jordan doing these days?
Oh, he's doing great. You know, he had a little bit of a rough patch going, but we've gotten past that. Everything's perfect, and his new book is phenomenal.
Did I hear right? You were telling me something about he put himself in a coma to get over his medical issues, and now he's on the other side, and he's got this new book with 12 more rules for life?
Yes, Dr. Jordan Peterson has four major publications, as well as a huge reading list on his website for all like the great texts and everything. He has Maps of Meaning, his first book, when he was an ultra professor, you know, spending like 3 hours on every sentence. He got to write the foreword to the new publication of the Gulag Archipelago. He was chosen.
What? He did that?
He did that. Yeah.
Oh, I love Solzhenitsyn. Anybody listening, if you've not read Alexander Solzhenitsyn, like turn off our podcast, go get a copy of the Gulag Archipelago, sit down and be prepared to be super, super depressed about the reality of life under the Soviets.
Or maybe finish the podcast first, then go do that.
That's
because this is an important episode.
That's right. Keep going. What else is this book about?
Right, so then he had 12 rules for life, and then he also had more rules for life that he wanted to write about, so he decided to incorporate those into an addition, sort of like a sequel to 12 Rules for Life, called Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life. The first 12 are an antidote to chaos. The next 12 are an antidote to excess order.
So help me with understanding the problem he's trying to address. Like, how do we have excess order in our lives? Is that really a problem?
He uses a really good analogy with yin and yang, which is the Eastern concept of chaos and order and all the things like the sun and moon, masculine, feminine, that are associated with both sides of that, and says that the human's responsibility is to keep 1 foot in chaos and 1 foot in order and walk the line between the two. And it relates in a ton of different contexts. So he talks about excess order in a negative sense by using the example of the totalitarian state. And he uses examples of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia and he makes the point that they're not chaotic regimes. Those are orderly regimes. But that excess of order ends up being tyrannical, and it needs to be opposed by something, and you need to be able to progress past the order, and the progressive element of society is what's chaos. Is pushing forward into what's new and integrating it properly so that you have a good balance between order and chaos.
So we shouldn't be kind of stuck in the past and never changing. There should be room for growth and change in society then.
Yes, but that growth and change in society should be oriented properly through having a foot in what used to be order. He actually uses the example of Pinocchio rescuing his father from the belly of the whale in the bottom of the ocean. He talks a lot about movies like that, actually. And he said that sort of Pinocchio, it's symbolic of rescuing the older ideas of generations before you and integrating those into the present. And so while you're pushing forward, also holding on to what's important from the past.
See, that fascinates me about Jordan Peterson. I watched a clip, I think you sent it to me, about a lecture he did about Disney's Lion King.
Right.
And he did something similar. I don't remember what each thing represented, but he sort of interpreted the movie or read the movie as an allegory of these different ideas.
I was listening to it in the car this morning, actually. So Scar is the totalitarian element of the state. And the monkey, I haven't really seen this movie, but I know, don't.
You've not seen The Lion King?
Okay, wait, I have, but like the live version,
Didn't I make
one?
you watch this in philosophy class? And
No.
you wrote, no, that was the year before.
I watched the live version, but I didn't really, I've never seen the original.
I don't know how you, anyway. Okay, continue. Scar is the totalitarian state.
Oh, yeah, and Mufasa is the representation of light. He's the king, he's the good, essentially. And he went into this whole thing about your kingdom is everything the light touches, and chaos is what's outside in the darkness, and you venture into it in the maturing of...
That's one of the places where I think, obviously, Peterson is clearly a Jungian. Carl Jung's major insight, at least as I understand it, without having read any of Jung, but I got this from a professor of mine who is also a Jungian, a guy named Dr. Ben Lockard. He at least claims that Jung's key insight was to kind of describe a set of archetypes that are always there. And it's the same sort of thing that a lot of stories, the kind of principles and the forces that are there, and Jung put names to them. And
like anima.
Maybe. I'll take that as one. I assume that is one.
I believe so. It's like the feminine part of someone's persona that you project on it. That may be a different thing, but it's definitely Jungian.
Okay, sure. But like the trouble I always have with that kind of analysis is like I've watched The Lion King and I love The Lion King as a story. I think Peterson's analysis is interesting. I'm just not sure any of it's actually there.
It's there. I'll give you the podcast to listen to on the way back. You'll listen to it. And you'll think so.
Okay. Well, tell us a bit more about what are some of Peterson's rules?
Okay, his first rule in his first book of rules is stand up straight with your shoulders back. And he goes into this whole explanation of lobsters and serotonin, which that's where the lobsters comes from, is that rule.
He talked about that in the debate we watched him do years ago.
Exactly. And he talks about essentially like carrying yourself properly in the world and holding yourself up so that you face challenges. And he talks about how the psychoanalysts like Freud, or maybe he was a behavioralist. I think he was a psychoanalyst. I'm not
Freud
sure.
was the original psychoanalyst.
Right.
Yeah.
And he discovered that I think it was called confrontational therapy, or it's exposure therapy, is one of the best ways to get your clients to overcome their fears, whether it's like a tarantula or elevator or something, is that you voluntary exposure, voluntary on their behalf, to what they're afraid of leads to is the remedy. It's the cure, essentially, for whatever they're afraid of. So if someone's afraid of elevators, you start by showing them pictures until they're bored of it. You take them to a building and have them look at it, and eventually they'll be going into it and looking up and facing it, all while standing up straight, allowing the fear to sort of project upon them.
Interesting.
And that is the most effective way for someone to overcome their fears, is voluntary exposure.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, if you are interested in the book, I am confident it's available on Amazon and every bookstore. Ethan, one more time, who's the author? What's the title?
Dr. Jordan B. Peterson is the author, and his newest book is Beyond Order. Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life.
Excellent. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to what I am both happy and sad to say is the final episode of What's the Res? Ooh. My name is Josh Herring.
My name is Ethan Delves.
And for the last 3 years, we have been having a running conversation about the current resolutions in the world of high school debate. If any of you listening to this episode are part of our few regular listeners, you may have noticed that we have been increasingly sporadic this year. Mm-hmm. 2020, 2021 as a school year has been certainly unique. I'm not going to use that phrase unprecedented. I hate that phrase. These unprecedented times is just an ugly phrase at this point. But it's been a unique year. We'll share some of that later on in the show about where we are. But we have decided that this podcast has lived a great life, and we are drawing it to a close with this episode.
It has drawn to a close.
It has drawn to a close.
Yeah.
Well, we are making it. We're the creators of this thing. It's not a self-existent thing.
But I think that it's coming to the end of its lifetime in a good and fulfilled way. It's an entity of its own. Okay, well, I think maybe at least if Jordan Peterson can allegorize everything under the sun, I'll just draw a biblical quotation here where David was old and full of years, and then he died. Our show. Why David? That's literally everyone.
Well, I know, but King David got that great line. He was old and full of years, and then he died. At the right time, he died. Our show, hopefully, I have no idea if our show will live forever on the internet. I think most things live forever on the internet. But we're no longer going to be making new shows. I figured we would kind of start this show after talking about Jordan Peterson is rather appropriate because that is still our most listened to episode. We're at almost 400 plays of that episode by this point.
That was such a good debate. I was on the floor of my living room with like 3 notepads, notes scrawled everywhere from both sides of that debate. It was awesome.
I tried to flow the debate, and that was a mistake.
Well, you can't flow a conversation. It was more of a conversation.
It was a conversation.
It was a presentation of communist axioms and then a conversation.
That's about it. I mean, Slavoj Žižek and Jordan Peterson, and man, 3 hours. We did about an hour and a half debrief of that round, I think, and that was one of our really fun conversations along the way. So I thought we would have a moment of at least maybe a bit of nostalgia. Ethan, take us way back. Some of this is in our first episode, but why did we start this show?
We started this show because, well, I wanted something to do to begin with. Like I wanted something. I love media. I still like media a lot. I don't think it's necessarily in like the social media aspect, but I like the idea of a massive forum open to communication from everywhere, like YouTube, Facebook. I love the idea of that, and podcasts especially. Clearly, I like talking, so it's better than us just writing articles and putting them on WordPress. Not against anything.
I think we did like 3 of those. We still have a What's the Res Medium account.
Right. Yeah, no, we did have, and I wrote a couple Medium articles. I think one of them was about Jordan Peterson. And but I realized that a podcast would be the best way to, convey the goal of exposing more people to debate and creating a baseline educational platform. And I think the idea for that sort of came out of, like, I've experienced a little bit of competition and debate, and I've entered into an activity that has a lot to it. And when you enter into something with a large commitment that has a lot to it, then you end up having a lot to say about it, and you know the nooks and crannies of it, and no one's ever going to know those things and without having experienced it. So if you can tell them like what's coming their way, what to be prepared for, it's like kind of just helping someone get ahead. I love that idea, and I was really excited about being a part of an activity that has so many different facets to it, and you can just talk about all of them on separate episodes, and it's talking, not writing, and you just get to put it out there. So yeah, I think that was awesome.
I think that's huge. I mean, there's certainly something about debate that lends itself to giving back to the community. I mean, nobody gets good at this in any way without a lot of help from other people, whether that's competing against excellent debaters and kind of learning from how often you lose. They're helping you in a way, but I know you have developed pretty early on a habit of actually meeting the people that you debated against and forming connections and chatting with people and getting like contact info. And
especially at Harvard, I still have so many people on my phone. I'm like, who are these people? Oh yeah, and I put a little description like Harvard Flow Girl or something.
Yep. I mean, there's something about, and then you get all of that, and you're constantly, like, every time you learn a new technique, there's sort of this idea of, like, how do I pass this on? How do I share this? There was a legacy building idea kind of at the root of this. I remember there also being something about, like, I know I wanted to create sort of lasting resources. The idea of making something that, as debate resolutions cycle through, we'd be like, oh yeah, what did we say a few years ago about gun rights and about immigration and about health care? And we've actually gotten to the point, I think, where we've seen some topics come back around. This year that's definitely been true. And there's been a lot to this. It's been really kind of fun.
It's been awesome. We've established like a good stake in this game that requires so many different types and levels of competence that it's just like, and we've put like our stake in that, which is so cool.
And it awesome. Really is. So let me ask you this as kind of a different question. And do feel free, as always, to interrogate the question itself. I don't mean to imply an answer by the question. But when you think about our podcast, where we've had, let's say, I don't actually know how many episodes we have, but we're well over 100 episodes. We're between 100 and 200 episodes. We have 3 seasons. And God alone knows how many people we've interviewed over these years. Yeah. Would you say, have we been successful in this venture?
Well, what was the goal? Because we started, and we had reasons for starting. That doesn't mean we had a goal. And we had lots of wants and desires. And I think that through starting the podcast, we formulated those into more of a plan. And like you said, we've ended up with a decent following, lots of downloads, and a surprising amount of downloads, really. Interviewing tons of people that know so much more than we do.
About all kinds of random topics. I mean, remember the guy, I don't remember his name, Dr. Aldi, I think.
Right,
we
interviewed.
I mean, he gave us all kinds of information about coal dust, transmission patterns.
Right,
and
wait, is that the guy from Harvard?
Yeah, the line pollution rates and that kind of thing. I had no idea that was a thing.
We learned, and to kind of go on the back end of this, we learned how to interview people properly, both of us, I think, especially you, because you conducted most of the interviews, and we had dual interviews too. We learned like how to ask proper questions and how to extract information from someone in a conversational manner that's valuable. And it's not dry. It's a conversation that we're learning from each other through the conversations. We learned how to interview people. We learned how to use a media-oriented platform to put out information and actually have it reached by people and have them respond. And I think that's significant. So
that's true. We have gotten I think we've gotten like 10 different emails over the last couple of years with people asking specific questions or sharing stories about their tournament experiences. I remember there was one mom from somewhere in the Midwest who found us and wanted to know, like, hey, can you help us connect with some NSDA debate group? And we at least like helped her connect. Like, I think I put a post out on the coaches page on Facebook and helped her with some who's nearby.
She used our episodes to help coach her daughter, who is the only member of the debate team.
Which, I mean, that right there is just amazing.
That is that sole reason. Even if we had done this for 4 years, that's a success in and of itself. We learned how to network. I mean, you are a networking master now, like literally a networking mastermind. And we're not afraid to just go to an article, we find it interesting, and then put it in the Harvard professor's email and just be like, yo, what would you mean by this? Like, and we actually had a reason to email them so they would respond, right?
And honestly, I mean, I discovered that people are, not always, but most of the time people are incredibly open to being interviewed. And it's not, I sort of assume that, oh, this person as the leading expert in his field about this subject, he'd never actually respond to an email from a high school teacher.
But
it's not true.
Yeah. I mean, why do you think he put it out? He needs something. Like, articles are a form of networking and putting your stake in something as well. And that's kind of what we've done with the podcast. So, I mean, we learned how to interview. We learned how to network. We've made it a tangible impact on the community by helping out, I mean, a mom and her daughter in the Midwest. We've had, what else have we had? We've had emails coming back of particular cases from debaters who are actively writing their cases and asking for a take. And it doesn't mean our take isn't necessarily valuable, but it's a second opinion. And we can even put those questions on the show in case anyone else had the same question and sort of have it received by a wider base of people. So
we've also got now this isn't true of all of our episodes, but some episodes that are really good for describing debate techniques that are sort of evergreen. Because there are those things about debate that seem to come and go. Spreading is a fad. Running a pick is a fad. Hopefully the fad of putting tricks in a really fast case will die like today. That would be awesome. But then there are those things like, do you remember the episode we did about discussing whether or not you should be debate partners with your friend?
Yeah.
That episode's never going to be not topical. I mean, that's always a question that people want to debate with their best friends. I still think it's a terrible idea. People should treat debate as a separate thing than their friendship. But we have that network or that bank of content that is really always going to be helpful for helping new people get into this game.
And I think that some episodes that particularly fall into that category are the debate paradigm episodes. I mean, util's not changing. The way people use it might evolve, but the principles are never changing. And in the deontology episode, one of my favorite was the interview with Dr. Vetter, because when I did that, first I got to do it by myself, and I had a cool studio on there that the person who gave me access to that studio definitely does not want to be named on this podcast, so I'm going to refrain from that because they did not like that last time. And the first question I asked, he responded, and I was like, "Oh, thanks." It felt so dumb. But then the rest of the interview went so smoothly, and he gave such great information about. We were talking about college that time,
Yep.
And he even wrote an entire book on college, which I think it's so cool to have someone who made an entire book about a topic right next to you, just speaking about it with you, and that we're the platform that gets to deliver that to people.
That's amazing. And honestly, I think the biggest thing, I remember you decided this pretty early on, and I was a bit skeptical, but you were absolutely right about this, that the key to us doing well with this was hitting that good conversational flow. And I remember, I think you listened to a couple Joe Rogan episodes, and I've still not made it through a whole Joe Rogan episode. I mean, even the one with him and Elon Musk, I couldn't even, they're just so long. But the conversational nature has been really good. And I think that's the key to a lot of our interviewing success, because figuring out how to ask that right question and how to ask the question that opens up the conversation rather than closes it, and sort of, honestly, I think it's that paired with judging a ton of congressional debate has given me a whole different sense of the life cycle of a conversation, like the beginning, the interaction, the closing. The same paradigm, if you will, that's in congressional debate also tends to work for these kinds of episodes, where sometimes we can just go and go and go for hours, it seems like. Other times you're like, I have mined everything this person has to say that's of value, and we need to close this conversation immediately before we get bored.
Yeah, it's the perfect balance between an interview and a conversation, or I guess a formal interview is a better way of putting that, and a casual conversation, because casual conversations flow, ebb and flow in whatever direction they want to go to, but there's no distinct goal to having the conversation. Interviews have too many distinct goals, but right now we're trying to extract valuable information in a conversational approach from someone who has that information. And I think we've learned to navigate that pretty well. I
think so. And it's I'm working on a paper right now for it's the final exam for the class I'm taking this semester, but it's all about the Socratic view of the good life being conversational. And kind of what Plato is always looking for is, how do we have a good conversation about this topic? And I feel like this show it leans in that direction. It's not so much that we invite people on to get the right answer. We invite people on our show, or we get together to have a good conversation about a worthwhile topic.
And it's better when you get a sense of the resolution than when you get a factoid about the resolution. Because that's one of the things I realized kind of early on in debate, around probably I would say freshman year, where if you have an understanding or a sense of the resolution, it's a weird thing, but it's like you have an abstract grip on the resolution. It's much better than having, that solid like silver bullet argument, as I like to call it, or this statistic that you think is impenetrable, but really you could just weigh it differently and then it's not yours anymore.
Yeah, because it's really, the debate is really about the interpretation of the facts. Because, I'm sure you've seen some of this now that you've judged more this year. When you get to a good tournament, most people have the same set of facts. And it's really about what do you do with those facts. It's not about, that round, what was his name? Darvesh, that you went against Darvesh at Coolidge, where he beat you because he pulled out a random statistic about Scandinavian countries. That's not normal. What's normal is that, we've all done our research, we know the facts, and now it's about who makes the best use of it because of that interpretation.
Yeah.
That's the best kind of debate.
And that's a good skill, too, is how to give words significance based on your interpretation of them and how you convey that to people. What could be more valuable than that in life, really? This is a game that, you play formally in high school and maybe even college and for some people, and you're going to take that with you and learn, you're going to have people listening to your interpretation of words for the rest of your life. That is a significant thing, especially if you have something to say. So I think that's awesome.
I completely agree. Well, let's think back. We started this thing really a little bit more than 2 years ago. This was February of 2019. We're in our third year of podcasting. Think about kind of stage of life for me for this question. How have you changed since February of 2019?
I would say not solely on behalf of the podcast, but definitely the podcast helped with this, is that I can speak my own opinion confidently. And I'm able to say what I actually think, even if I'm not sure that it's right, or especially if I'm not sure that others are going to agree with it. Others in my vicinity too, because you'll always find that when you're around different people, you will say different things and you'll certainly act different ways because nobody's that consistent. And it's a weird thing to think about, should you, it's like you're changing your formality around people or stuff like that. Are you really changing how genuine you are, or you're just changing your approach to the conversation? It's a weird sort of thing to think about. But when it comes to things that you say, you want those to always be relevant to what you actually think, because that's the most valuable way to have a conversation, because if you're wrong, you get them corrected, and if you're right, then somebody else gets corrected, and that adds value to the entire group. And I think that being on What's the Res and having positive and negative reactions from listeners, positive and negative reactions from you as well when I'm attempting to defend something that you're just no, let's just keep doing the negative. It's no, Bernie exists and he deserves to be mentioned on the podcast, and so does Medicare and Medicaid. And
why does Bernie have to exist?
No, but you say this for anything that costs money. You're wait, can we just talk about the cost of it? Something's got to cost money, right? And something's got to be done with the money.
Everything costs money.
Every sort of episode that we go, I'm less afraid to challenge you on something. And that is I feel like that's particularly relevant to me going into college, especially a college that may not align with the beliefs that I hold or the beliefs that I hold right now, and we're going to see how they evolve. I'm going to need to be primed to challenge people, and I think that this is my platform for learning how to challenge. So
I think that's really good. 3 years ago, you were a sophomore. When we started this thing, you did not have a job. Along the way, you added, at one point, you started working 10 hours a week at Starbucks, but how much were you working at the peak?
Okay, so I started in holiday season, and it was on track out. So I would work a good 20 or a little bit more because it was on break, and what else am I going to do? And during school with my manager, I would work about 10 to 15 hours a week, which is perfect. 12.5, I remember, was my ideal number. I loved that. It was maybe 2 or 3 days, and it was perfect. Got a new manager. I'm up to 20 or 24 with school. And I just put in my 2 weeks last night. I'm coming into a new stage of life, going to college. I've got tons of exams and logistics to figure out as far as roommates go and suite mates go in college, and placement exams for what class I'm going to be in and what classes I get to skip. So I think it was just like this episode. It was the end of a good era, and I love the feeling of having gone into something, learned the ropes, improved it, and left a mark and left. I think that is I could have never asked for a better first job than Starbucks. It was truly, especially during COVID too. Like, wow, I get to tell people I worked retail during COVID. That's pretty cool. So best first job experience I ever could have wanted. I met so many different types of people I never would have met without having had that job. So A+ experience overall.
Oh yeah. I'm thinking there's also, I mean, you went from, you were in my elective the first year that it existed. We had a year where we were able to do some recording at times during the day because we did that tutorial that year. And then this year you were in the elective for the first half of the year as a virtual student. Mm-hmm. And then you've also been part of the club. And you've sort of shifted a little bit from full-on varsity competitor to less competition and more coaching.
Yeah.
And more kind of jumping in and able to volunteer as a judge where possible. I know this has been like the strangest 18 months in particular. I think when we started this show, I was teaching full-time, just teaching. And then I shifted to Dean of Students, and then we had some staffing changes, and I shifted into an interim assistant administrator role. I think one of the reasons I bring all that up is I think when we started this show, we both had the ability to carve out time for it.
Uh-huh.
And it was easier to carve out time for it. But I think things have changed in this way, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think stage of life, we both shifted to where it's really difficult now to carve out. We've kind of landed on Tuesday afternoons after middle school club on weeks when we're not both fried.
Yeah.
We can record.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember our 3 episodes a week recording season?
Yes. Oh my goodness. With Noah being there all the time and recording these things. Oh man.
Oh my goodness. We I don't know how we kept that up, and we didn't keep it up long, but that was nuts.
That was intense.
Well, let's think about debate a little bit. You mentioned some things already that I think speak to the value of debate, but I'm kind of curious about this as I think you're not the first senior who will graduate from our team, but I think you are the first one who has done this for 6 years. Daniel Price might be somewhere close to that, but you're the first one who's done this for that long. What would you say, kind of a snapshot? What's the value of this game? Why should somebody do debate?
The value of the game is that it's a game. It's learning something and getting good at it. There's so many different facets of value in that concept that it really doesn't matter if it's debate, which is wow, the last episode of What's the Res, it doesn't matter if you do debate. But really,
Haley will be really excited to hear you say that.
Oh,
she loves
knows.
speech.
She knows this. She definitely already knows this. And even if she hasn't realized it. But being a part of a game, a complicated game, for sure, like debate, where, man, you need to learn how to, it's a psychological thing where you need to learn how to have confidence speaking to other people and learning to compel them towards a conclusion, learning how to represent one of two polar conclusions that are completely different. Learning research skills, learning how to improve those so they're faster and more effective, learning how to cut cards and use technology properly. There's an infinite amount of facets to this game. And getting good at all of them is pretty important some more important than others, but getting to the, goal of being a more competent, well-read, more understanding of current events and past events to individual. So, and that's sort of particularly relevant to debate, but choosing a game and committing to it, even if you don't like it at first is the important part. Because, what do you like about debate at first? I thought it was speech club. I gave some dumb speech about some dumb thing thinking it was a debate. And, I certainly didn't like that first round where I was sweating and shaking, but that first victory where I told this guy he had new information in the final round, he was a junior and I'm a 7th grader. And Mrs. Herring told me she was watching that. I didn't know she was there. She said she saw that. Yeah. I was shaking. I didn't even know what an iPad was. I had a notebook paper with my case on it. And the judge just smiled at me and circled my name, and that was my first win. First round, first win. And that was the indication that I had done something right and that I had moved up in the... I'm going to sound Petersonian on this, but in the hierarchy, the competence hierarchy of debate. And that's a healthy and that's a good thing. Learning the game, getting good at it, and inching your way up and never forgetting the people lower.
I really like that because in part it's the I am no athlete, obviously. I think you know this. I don't do sports. I ruin most sports metaphors that I try in class. It's pretty bad sometimes.
You should have heard Anderson's reaction to your quantum physics metaphor with the tree in the forest you were telling me. He was there when he said that.
Oh.
That was hilarious. You know how he loves quantum.
That's pretty solidly,
It's a loose analogy.
Accurate.
Yeah.
Like it's a loose understanding of quantum mechanics, but it holds. I mean, I borrowed that straight from a professor at Hillsdale, which might be an appeal to authority, but I think it's a relevant appeal to authority. Anyway, I was going somewhere. I lost my train of thought.
Oops.
Ethan. Oh well.
Just read the question again.
The question is value with a question mark.
Well, what value do you think the game has had for you as a administrator of the game?
Honestly, I think that's where I was going to go. The thing I wanted to say a minute ago. Then I want to circle back to that question.
Okay.
The thing I think you landed on that was so well put. I think that would apply to any game that somebody finds and sticks with.
Any game.
I mean, I think we have students who they feel similarly about basketball, about soccer, about baseball, and even, I mean, we're pretty decent at soccer and basketball. Our baseball team has always been our weakest athletics team. But guys stick with it for years, and they find something similar. Like, I think I disagreed with him at the time, but I've come to really appreciate this. The president of Hillsdale, a guy named Dr. Larry Arnn, I once heard him say that he thinks the most important thing you can do as a student is to find a few things that you love and do them really, really well. Don't try to do everything under the sun. I think you've kind of hit on the value of finding something like, this is my thing, and I'm going to do it really, really well. And there's all these side benefits, but it's not that they're truly unique, and they don't have to be unique.
Absolutely
even
not.
Though uniqueness is a great argument in debate. But they have all these side benefits.
It's just learning how to improve something and make it better. Because once you put yourself in the game and learn the rules and learn the ropes, I mean, then you're able to play it well. And eventually, when you get really good at games, you can even this is sort of like the C.S. Lewis's idea of making the Tao better, but also not forgetting it. Like, you get to improve the game, and you get to, and what are we doing here? We have a podcast where we critique things that we don't like about the game. Quite literally critique. Like, that would be one of them, right? And
yes.
we as people who have been involved in the game and have found successes, although minor, in the game, have some level of say as to how the game should be critiqued and improved. And that's significant, is improving a game that improves people. I think that's a pretty cool thing to do. And that's not something that everybody gets to do. But it really can be anything. It could be baseball, basketball. But I really am starting to agree with, find something and start doing it and figure out if you like it. And if you like it, go 10x on that thing. Learn to get good at it and then improve it and do it a service when you're finished.
You asked me the value I see in the game. I think one of the biggest values I see is just what happens as students stick with it. Because this year, as you know, our biggest growth has been in middle school debate. And we have some middle schoolers who I'm looking forward to seeing this happen with them next year. But we have some middle schoolers this year who have been doing this now for a couple years. And suddenly, there's this amazing transformation that happens. And you can't predict when it's going to happen. It's not a matter of right instruction. It's a matter of just sticking with it. Where when you're a novice, you are consciously thinking of all these things and you realize that you're not good enough at all of the things, and you constantly get all this negative feedback as a novice. But if you just stick with it, and suddenly these things become intuitive, and suddenly if you practice your piece enough, or if you practice your case enough, all of a sudden there's this transformation moment, and suddenly the scores start going up, the wins start coming, and it literally is a matter of hard work. So honestly, the biggest value I've seen over the last 6 years of you doing this is literally watching our program move from this beginning point where we have everyone at novice stage to now we have students who are kind of at novice, intermediate, and varsity stages kind of along the way. And being able to see that progression, at the same time, I have loved, as frustrating as it is at times, I have loved watching what happens when we go to these national circuit competitions. And when I judge a national circuit round, it forces me to elevate my perception of the game. I suddenly see the difference between a little league game versus a minor league game versus a major league game. And you can see that in kind of these, and I don't think we will ever be that school that arrives at the Harvard tournament and people are like, oh no, Thales is here. That will never be us.
Oh no, Thales is here.
But we will be that, we'll be that school that at least okay, we can see how it works at this level. And there's a huge value in that, I think.
What school would you equate to that status now? Cape Fear? Perhaps?
Oh, nobody. I mean, obviously Durham Academy and Cary Academy, but even
people
they
get scared of them.
They are not. They're not nearly. I don't think they're nearly as competitive on the national circuit as like Stuyvesant, is
Harvard Westlake.
Yeah, like there's
a Drake Jesuit. Oof,
that's a whole nother. There's a whole nother stratum above what's in our region, but. I mean, I still think it's of enormous. I love being able to kind of see the different layers and being able to see how different schools. That's another thing I've loved realizing. I used to think it was all about me as a coach shaping these kids, and then it's like, what happens? I don't see it that way anymore. Instead, I kind of see debate as this, and speech as this sort of massive local, regional, and national collaborative effort where each coach is teaching his or her students to the best ability possible. And then we're all mutually providing feedback on each other. So I can give you a bunch of advice, and then you go try it out, and you might get advice from 4 other coaches that suddenly helps us both see a better way for the next tournament. I think that's amazing. It's a huge. It's one of my favorite pictures of what some scholars call the American Principle of Association, where we don't depend on like the U.S. federal government to make an organization. We just all kind of make our own. And debate is this picture of literally thousands of schools that are each practicing the same game at their level and then coming together and working together to all get better at it.
That's how a good game should be. And it's one massive, really well put together game. It's awesome.
Well, let's talk about a few of the different versions of the game. Because over the last 6 years, you have had, I think for the last 3 years, you've done mostly LD, but you had a couple years where you did novice and then varsity public forum, and you've done Coolidge throughout. So talk to me about some of the differences between those styles, and do you actually have a favorite by the time you're done with high school debate?
Okay. I think I've enjoyed LD the most. I think, and maybe it's just because I've done it the most, because people will just enjoy things more as they do them more. And I think part of it was because I enjoyed being solo. I like having control. Which isn't always the best thing, but I guess that was an outlet for me to be able to have control over more things. I liked philosophy, and it had a loose association with philosophy that's much looser now that I've done it more. I get to realize how much looser it is.
When we started, I was like, we got to have like 2.5 minutes of framework, and that's not a good idea.
Yeah, or legitimate philosophy. But it's at least I get to say the word util, and at least I get to hear the word deontology occasionally.
Very few people run Kant correctly. But anyway, that's a conversation for a previous episode. We've already had that conversation.
Yeah, look at that. Look at us. But so I've enjoyed LD the most. But I really did like my PF times sort of in the earlier stages of my debate journey with having a partner was where I started accelerating. Because I remember when me and Dallas won our first award, I think we got 4th place, I'm pretty sure.
Dogwood Novice.
Yeah, Dogwood Novice, I think it was 4th place. We were up on stage, and it was like 6th place, and it wasn't us, and 5th place, and it wasn't us, and we got 4th. We were like, wow, we made it all the way up here. And that's when the growth started, like the curve started to point upwards in our direction, I feel like. So I think that LD is great for, it's just a standard good type of debate. It'll force you to think on your feet. It'll force you to think on your feet by yourself. And I found that judges and coaches are very willing to give feedback, and it's just a good feel. So what were you going to...
Well, I was going to say, I think it's interesting you felt that acceleration there, because there can be a dynamic where when partners are rightly aligned, their strengths multiply with each other.
Yeah.
Because they kind of fill each other's weaknesses. And I remember at one point, I don't know if this was true all the way through, but at one point, you were the smooth talker and Dallas was the researcher.
That's still how it is, and we don't even debate together anymore. Dallas is still the knowledgeable one. But it's odd. It's so odd, because I've realized that I'm really not knowledgeable about much of anything. But people will trust me because I can say things. They're not false things. They're just extrapolations of the true things that are just like longer.
This is another conversation another day, but there is a long-standing discussion in philosophical circles about the nature of knowledge. And the one line I think is relevant here, Richard Weaver talks about the ancient argument that knowledge is not knowledge of particulars. Knowledge is the understanding of universals.
Yep.
And I think that's where I would see you and Dallas differing in a lot of ways. Like, Dallas does have an amazing grasp of particular details, but I think you do a better job of rising to the deductive principle. And now when you pair those, you have an unassailable argument. But it's just, I think that's probably why people think that you are more knowledgeable than you would say you are. Because one thing debate does do for everybody who sticks with it, you would get an amazing confidence and you sound like you can just drop this principle and you know you're right. Not because you really have done all that much research, but because you do have a few facts you can support it with and it seems believable. But there's something there about the difference between particular and universal.
Something that helps there is that people don't want to listen to you if you don't look like a person who should be listened to. Or if you don't, and I think this is the worst word to describe this, but being approachable. It's like, I have friends that know a ton of stuff. But the funniest thing is that no one cares. It's like, even when they're explaining it, it's the coolest thing. But it's not attached to anything substantive. It's not drawn to a greater principle, which is why I always think the most effective way that I learn is being able to categorize the particulars that I'm learning. And I think I got that from your lectures, mainly in history, because you would be talking about some event, and I'm like, well, what's the historical context of this? Is it Renaissance or Reformation? And I didn't know what those meant at the time because we were doing medieval history. But what stream of continuity does this particular fit into? And I think when people know that, they learn a lot better because they're able to locate it in some context of something. And I think that's where the persuasion element of debate comes in, and the impact weighing and making it significant. You have to make things significant in debate because what's on the paper is not significant. But once you make it significant, then it really starts to take action in the judge's mind.
Well, that's another move that I think is another big difference between novice and varsity, and maybe between like good and great in varsity, because you can get people who have that immediate grasp of the details and they can rattle off the facts. But when you get somebody who can then give those facts the principle and link them to the impact, that's a whole different level of discussion.
I think it comes in, which is odd, I think it comes in 4 stages. The first is you know the facts and you're able to give the facts. And at the lower levels, you start winning with that. And the particulars, like that was my first round, where it's like, hey, you brought in new information. It's like, oops, great.
Right.
I knew a particular. Then you start to develop a little bit of the confidence. You're accelerating a little bit. You have some of the smooth talking ability. And you can start to beat the people who know the actual facts, but you can just sound a little better and interpret them just a little bit better. And they get swayed in your direction because they start to sound like they don't know what they're talking about because they're scrambling for details. But they're not scrambling for details. They're right. They just don't look right, so they don't get voted for. Then those people, those smooth talkers, get completely overwhelmed by people who just know way too many facts. It's like the original facts people, but prime version. I'm talking, there's a lot of people at Coolidge who are like this. There's a lot of people at Harvard who are like this, who just know so many facts. They weigh them, but it's all numbers, and it's all calculation. And then there's the master level, level number 4. I'm thinking of one person in particular, is Kareem O'Day at Coolidge. I think, he
was. I wanted him to win so much.
He clearly knew his facts. He clearly has a good understanding of socialism, which was the topic. And I remember
it because socialism versus capitalism resolution.
And I remember the topic because of him, not because of anything else. He had a good understanding. He's debated tons of rounds on it already. He knew the facts, but he made it so deliverable. And he just gave it to people so well. He sold it to people so well. And that's the master level, I think. So it really does feel like it comes in 4 stages. Like, I don't know. That's just kind of my conceptualization of that.
Oh, be careful, because when you start categorizing things in those kind of layers, you're one step closer to becoming a teacher someday.
That would be great. I think I would like that. I think I would like that a lot.
Well, we'll talk in 4 years when you're done at Chapel Hill and see if you want to come back for a year of teaching.
Who knows what I'm going to look like when I'm done at Chapel Hill.
We'll see.
Hopefully taller.
Maybe. That's possible. Okay, well, we're coming up probably on time here, but let's wrap this up with one last section, if you will. I'm curious about your thoughts, particularly about podcasting, because I know when I distinctly remember your question. Like, you asked me, what can we do to get more people interested in debate? And you asked the question on the right day, because the day before I had read a really interesting blog post by a professor named Dwight Longnecker. And
how do you remember that?
He's now a professor at Hillsdale, so I keep seeing his name. Anyway, he had written this article on the Imaginative Conservative all about podcasting as this new oral form of communication, and it seemingly, I mean, this is way back in 2019, but at the time he wrote about like podcasting is taking the world by storm, and I was like, you know what? Maybe we should give that a try. So, I mean, it seems like everyone and his brother has a podcast. Yep. It wasn't unique when we started. It's much less unique now.
Yeah.
But we've now done this for 3 years. What are your thoughts on the form of podcasting and this as a form of communication? Is this an effective way to communicate a message?
Well, in the debate world, how else are you supposed to communicate a message besides talking? It's even better that there's two of us, because it would be we would hit a lot more of that formal outline structure if it was one person.
Yep.
Because you can get lost talking with yourself, and other people will certainly get lost, and they'll certainly press that pause button and never download another episode of yours if it's just you. And most podcasts I've listened to have more than one person. It's kind of rare, unless I listened to this one guy that trades foreign exchange or something, and it's just him, but he has his outline, and he talks about his techniques, and it's interesting because it's cool.
Right, and you're listening to that for the information about foreign exchange of currency or whatever, and that's what you're there for. You're not there for the dialogical nature.
Yeah, but the dialogue is important because then you get the interpretation, you get an analysis of what's going on of two people, so you get competing analyses of what's going on. Especially as I learn to challenge your analysis of things more, which I wouldn't do at the beginning, but now I'll do it. I'll do it intentionally too. Yep. That adds more value to it because you can hear the nuance, you can hear someone go off tangentially, but in a productive manner. It's okay, we need to explore this for a second and then come back to the main topic. And there's humor to it. You can't have those humor-based moments in a piece of writing, nor does anybody want to sit down and have the discipline to do a piece of writing. This takes much less discipline. There's much less of a barrier to entry. You sit down and you talk with someone. It's you don't have a pencil, there's no pad of paper. There is a computer, but you're certainly not typing on it for an hour, trying to come up with something substantive, going back, editing. It's when we want to go back and edit something, we say, sorry, that was a little edgy, Or you go back and cut it out so they don't have to see that.
Right.
And it's more natural and more human. And I think that people, whether they realize it or not, take to things that are more natural and more human.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it definitely fits better. It's a good conversation. I mean, goodness, we could not have kept this up with a weekly blog. And at least at the time, blog, I remember we looked for this. I mean, there are now a few others. There were a few other debates and speech podcasts out there now, but there weren't when we started this, or at least not that we could find. There were blogs. So I remember part of what I was interested too is let's do something that's not currently being done. And there are several coaches who have written all kinds of stuff in blog form. But I think you're right about this being something that's more natural. It was easier for both of us to do.
You don't need to be you need to be not an expert, but respected in your area in order to have a blog. Because nobody will read your post. But you don't need to have as much rapport in order to have a podcast, which is interesting. And I think it's because there's two of us, so we compete, which makes our ideas stronger and more valid. And I think
we also try to, and we early on we did some level of credential establishing in terms of we decided our format early on. I'm coming at it as from an adult's perspective. You're looking at the resolution from a competitor perspective, that doesn't make either of us credentialed experts by any means.
But if we had a blog, no one would read it.
No.
And it's not because people don't like reading. It's because this type of format, just like I think YouTube is the perfect example, it enables anybody to be a creator, and everybody should be a creator because everybody has, I think, something to say. Even if you're not an expert in the field, it's clearly this game is not all about information. It's clearly not all about information. It's about much more than that. It's about learning how to play a game. And everybody plays some type of game, so everybody should have something to say about it. And sure enough, I mean, YouTube has enabled everyday people to become creators and talk about things they find important. And surely enough, there's other people that find it important that develop a following. And I think that's very unique to podcasting or video with audio as well. But the closer to human, the less rationally legit you have to be, if that makes sense, right?
I think there's something to that. Like YouTubing and I assume Instagramming and being any kind of social media influencer, podcasting has this allure of if you get discovered and millions of people listen to you, you could monetize. And we tried that. And I think we managed to have 10 family and friend members who subscribe to our premium What's the Res episodes for a while.
Pity subscriptions.
That's all we ever got.
Those Medium posts. I was like, hey, do you want to read something I wrote, Mom? And then she'd read it. And
pay me for it. Yeah, that did not work. This was not our road to riches, but that's okay. Do any problems come to mind? Anything, if anybody listening is thinking about starting their own podcast, are there any problems to avoid you would suggest?
Don't invest in a super good microphone because you don't need it. Buy a Fifine microphone. Literally, just buy the Fifine.
Fifine should really they should send us money because we've used their stuff and I think we've endorsed them on at least 5 episodes.
Times. Yeah. Make sure your laptop has the proper adapter for it. Super simple stuff. And
GarageBand is honestly enough. If you want to be fancy, you could use Logic Pro X or Audacity if you are good with it. But GarageBand that comes preloaded on every Mac is sufficient to do basic editing.
Have a website that your podcast is based out of and update it because that makes it timeless. And you could just send people the link to the website. They have links to those however valuable Medium articles that I wrote, our contact information, and all of the episodes in a bank. It's about creating that named, labeled reservoir. If you get a website and attribute a domain name to it, I learned this the frustrating way. It will take like 3 days to show up on the internet, and they're not scamming you. It actually will work, and it still does work. www.whatstheres.com for any who are interested. But it does take a little while to show up. So get yourself in a $20 or $30 microphone, works fine. Put it into a laptop, plug it in. Learn how to put a noise gate on there so you don't sound like the Terminator, and which I've never seen or read. If it's a book, I don't know. But why are you looking at me like that?
Every geek listening to our show now hates you.
That's okay. It's the last episode. You're fine.
The Terminator is not a book. It is a show as a spin-off. It's the Sarah Connor Chronicles, but it's a string of very famous movies.
I have no clue what almost any of that meant except the last 3 words.
Okay.
But anyways, yeah, so it's all very technical stuff.
Any
It's
other
easy
Tar
to figure
Heels
out.
out there, please help Ethan cover his necessary movie education.
Oh,
next
year.
Yeah,
that's going to have to be a goal. But
Sheil Patel, I'm looking at you. You need to
Sheil
help.
doesn't watch that many movies.
Sheil knows what the Terminator
Sheil has a
movies
double
are.
major, a minor, and 2 internships right now, and he trades in his free time.
And he also, I'll wager, a spicy chicken Chick-fil-A sandwich. And if Sheil doesn't want that, he can name some equal sandwich.
want it. I'll take that.
I'll wager a spicy chicken Chick-fil-A sandwich that Sheil has watched at least one Terminator movie and would get the reference.
Okay, I agree. He probably has. But yeah, so
Anyway.
all the barriers to entry with podcasting are lower compared to blogging and anything else. It's very easy to figure out, and thank goodness in the modern age it's super cheap. It's like what, $30 for the microphone. Most people have a computer.
I think we pay $80 a year, no, $108 a year for Podbean to actually host our sound files.
Get a hosting website. Podbean's good. There's one called Blueberry, I think, that's also.
There's a bunch of them, but these files are big, and they will eventually. Oh, one other thing: if anyone listening is ever recording on GarageBand, if you run out of space on your computer to record the original file, GarageBand will just stop recording, and you will then, next time you look at it, you're like, man, I had the perfect episode. Only 15 of 45 minutes will have recorded. It will just have stopped when it runs out of room. So make sure to clear those files before you record a really good episode.
Just put them on Podbean, let the cloud have it. Yep. That's it. So yeah, get Podbean or get Anchor, I think is a super popular one too. Mm-hmm. Have a Google site, super easy to make, host your episodes, they have all of the HTML embedding code that you need built into Podbean for you. But just have the website to send them one link where they can find anything that they need, and it's easy to remember, and they can get back to it.
And that website makes it really easy to convince people that you are a legit show, because when you send emails asking, hey, would you come on my show? It's really helpful to be able to send links to similar styles of episodes. So when I ask somebody to come on an interview show, I'll send them 1 or 2 similar interviews of equally ranked people. So like if I'm emailing a university professor, I don't send them like you interviewing Patrick. Yeah, I send them an episode of like.
I met Patrick too through the podcast. That's another thing.
That's true. We met Patrick the Nihilist.
Patrick the Nihilist. We're still friends.
Good. I hopefully someday, if COVID's ever over and we can travel again, maybe someday we can all go to England and be like, knock on his door and be like, Patrick, we're here. And he'll be like, who are you?
He would, I mean, that would be, if I ever make it, I will make it to England because I have relatives there I've never met, but I'm totally visiting Patrick if I go to England.
Now, I'll take this next one first, but I think there's a ton of benefits to podcasting I've noticed. The biggest one I've seen 2 that I'll mention. First is I've gotten a lot better at projecting my voice because the microphone does not pick up everything. You have to like pitch your voice in a certain way and kind of aim at the mic. I've gotten really good at projecting, which honestly made teaching through a mask easier. So a surprise COVID benefit. But the other thing, being in the habit of just communicating orally regularly has been really good. I mean, it honestly helps me kind of keep in touch. Like, all right, how do I make my classroom more conversational and less like lecture heavy? And so that's kind of always in the back of my mind because we do this all the time.
This has taught us so many things. Like it's even difficult to describe. We've learned like too much for this podcast. It's awesome.
Well, we figured out how to prep for an interview pretty quickly. Like both of us, I think, we can Google the person, find 3 or 4 articles they've written, find their credentials, and figure out. I've also kind of gotten a lot better at figuring out how much time will a question take. And to do a 45-minute podcast, you really only need about 5 or 6 questions. If
Let
they're
them
the right
go.
Kind of questions.
Yeah, they're an expert.
Yeah.
Let them be an expert. You're not the expert.
Right.
Because so you can't come up with the good questions. They know what the questions are, and they'll answer them without even having an explicit question stated.
Yeah, we're just sort of, in those moments, we're sort of the guide, and no one's tuning in to listen to our opinions. They want to hear what the famous person has to say.
Exactly.
So, tons of benefits to podcasting. I think it's fair to say we've both learned a lot and enjoyed this whole project. It's been well worth our time putting out What's the Res.
Agreed. Definitely well worth the time. Learned so much.
All right, well, Ethan, I'm thoroughly glad you asked if we could find a way to get more people interested in debate several years ago. This has been really fun. If people want to get in touch with us and leave us any final feedback or send us any, I don't know if there are tear emojis, but we'll take them. Or any,
I'll take some tear emojis.
Any sad, nostalgic things. Oh no, my favorite podcast in the world is ending. How can people let us know that they are or they're very sad that we're closing out the show?
If y'all want to get in touch with us for the last episode one last time, send us some emojis. You can do so at whatstheres@gmail.com because that email will still be active. WHATSTHERES@gmail.com. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit at whatstheres_ or go to our website, www.whatstheres.com, which will always have the episodes there. And
not until next time, but for the rest of your lives, dear listeners.
For the rest of your lives, work hard, speak well, and seek the truth.